We're taught to chase success, but what if success isn't the same as flourishing? What if your life can look good on the outside and still feel like something's missing? Do you feel that way? You've checked the boxes, you've done the work, achieved what you were told would make you happy, and yet there's still this quiet ache, a whisper that says, is this it? Welcome to the Power to Flourish podcast, where science meets the art of a beautiful life. I'm Dr. Andrea Line, positive psychologist, giftedness expert and coach, and modern-day spiritual godmother to brilliant, deep-feeling women. This isn't just another self-help podcast. It's a sanctuary, a sacred space to come back to yourself. Each week, we'll explore the emotional experience of gifted, sensitive women and what it means to live a life that feels as beautiful as it may look. Because flourishing isn't a luxury, it's your birthright, and your life is waiting. This is the Power to Flourish podcast. If you're listening to this, you're likely a gifted woman who feels deeply, thinks intensely, and knows on a soul level that you were made for more than just surviving. This podcast was born from that same whisper in my own life. I'm Dr. Andrea Line, and I am a positive psychologist. And I wanted to start this off by explaining to you my own definition of flourishing from the standpoint of the science behind flourishing. Positive psychology is a relatively new field relative to other areas of psychology. And I was so blessed, really, to come across it at its birthing. It was around 2000, maybe 2001. I was a brand new graduate student in my early 20s at the University of Virginia, and I had just started studying the psychology of giftedness in one of the graduate programs, but also I was sort of creating my own program because I wanted to be a practitioner. Like I wanted to actually be a psychologist that helped people. And in the program for giftedness, it was an educational psychology program. So it was much more geared towards, at that stage in the early 2000s, the cognitive, the educational pieces around it. But I was so interested in the social emotional development and the lives of gifted people. So I had started a clinical and school psychology program, all at the University of Virginia. I was sort of combining these things together for my own path and feeling very weird because no one was doing that at the time. And at that very moment, positive psychology, the announcement of it by Dr. Martin Seligman, who is sort of known as the father of the positive psychology movement. He was the president of APA at the time, the American Psychological Association, and he cast this vision for this new field called positive psychology. And I came across some of his early writings, and it just set my heart on fire. I was so excited. And here I was in a clinical psychology program, which felt like the clearest path for me at the time, because honestly, I didn't know what other paths made sense. And I wanted to learn and be someone who could help people. So there I was on the path of clinical psychology. The field of positive psychology wasn't a thing yet in 2001. So, or it was just beginning. All of that to say, it is now 2025 as I record this. 25 years have passed, which, wow, I feel so old saying that, but 25 years have passed. There has been such growth and interest in this field that now you see it being, brought into business and obviously normal mental health fields and social media. It's the idea of positive psychology. Even if you are listening to this and you're like, I don't know anything about positive psychology, I promise that today's language and the way we talk about things like strength-based or even the word flourishing. People did not use the word flourishing before. Positive psychology was the one that really brought that to the forefront. So I say all of that because I have been along for the ride and learning and studying and integrating and teaching the principles of positive psychology, which is really the science of flourishing, of human flourishing. I have been doing this for over 2 decades. I have taught my students about it. I have obviously learned and used these principles in my own life. I love it so much. I find it so much more empowering and honestly focused on what we can do today and into the future than simply focusing on the ways we quote unquote fix things that are broken. There, again, it's not either or, but for me personally, like I said, when I first came across it, I just lit up. I knew this was for me. But there I was in a clinical psychology program, literally learning how to give tests and assessments and personality assessments and XYZ and learning how to diagnose people and then figure out the right treatment for them and all of those things. So I have that background, just so you know, but I really come to this work through this lens of positive psychology. So flourishing, the science of flourishing. When I speak about flourishing, I want you to know I don't just mean flourishing equals feeling good or flourishing equals happiness. It is true that in the field of positive psychology, there has been a lot of research done on topics like happiness, like meaning and purpose. And some of these other, I guess, if you were going to describe them as negative or positive, right? More positive attributes in our human experience, because historically, in the field of psychology, we focus so much on the other end of the spectrum, on the negative, that the field of positive psychology was really hoping to balance that out. Well, how do we know what helps people thrive? We weren't studying that before. We were studying people who were struggling. And so that didn't give us much information about, so what are the things that actually help people flourish? Things like, here's another example of how the science of positive psychology has infiltrated our culture at a level that it's very exciting for me, because 20 years ago, again, no one knew about this. It was so brand new, but now it is almost like overly done. I don't mean in the whole field. I mean things like gratitude. This was a huge, huge finding in the science of positive psychology early on. Now, of course, people from religious and spiritual backgrounds, have been teaching this for thousands of years. So I think it's funny. But in terms of a scientific framework for it, it was the field of positive psychology that stumbled upon gratitude. And that's where you've now, the things that I was teaching my students and using with clients, 15 years ago are now very mainstream. Like, we have gratitude journals. People know to do a gratitude list at the end of the night or write a gratitude letter. These things were not widely known or practiced even really 10 years ago, but certainly 20 years ago, 15 years ago, when I was beginning to teach this with the few clients that were in my world at that time. So I just want everyone to understand, as we are starting off this podcast, the power to flourish. It's just understand it's not about perfection. It's not about being happy all the time. In fact, as we dive into this more and more, you'll understand that people who really flourish are not afraid of the spectrum of emotions that humans experience. There's no fear. There's no trying to just seek out happiness at all costs. There is really a balance, and it's really more about living in alignment with who you are. And that, I mean emotionally, I mean spiritually, I mean psychologically. There's, of course, a physical component. There's just so many components to flourishing. So it's really more about functioning well in life. There are elements to it that include positive emotions, deep relationships, purpose, engagement, meaning, all of those things, which we will go into more in future episodes. But at this moment, I just wanted to really give you a little context behind that word flourishing. Where does it come from? I mean, obviously, positive psychology didn't come up with that word, but the science of positive psychology was the one that I think catapulted it into our minds and our current understanding of well-being. So just know, it is a way of being, an embodied, grounded, sacred return to who you truly are. That is how I think of it. And that is what we're here to explore. So why is this different for gifted women? Why am I on here creating a whole podcast specifically for gifted women? That is really, really specific, right? Suffice to say, gifted women are different. They do not fit in the box of your just kind of quote unquote normal average person. And a lot of gifted women don't know they're gifted, which is another reason why I'm doing this podcast, is to educate people on what does that even mean. And again, we're going to go into this in much more detail in future episodes. But for now, let me just highlight some of the traits. You don't have to have all of them. If you're really curious, you can take the quiz. I'll tell you more about that later. But there is an intensity, both cognitively and emotionally, even like neurologically, there's a whole thing around intensity. There's a kind of sensitivity that a lot of gifted women and gifted men for that matter. I'm just speaking directly to the gifted women at this moment. So let's highlight some of the traits of gifted women. Not all of you will experience it this way, but here are just some ideas. There is a kind of intensity that gifted women possess. Not just cognitively, although that is true, there is oftentimes an emotional intensity, even sometimes an intensity around our experience of the physical environment that really, if we want to use this word that has become very popular in recent years, is a form of neurodiversity. It's our brains and our bodies, but we'll speak on the brain level right now, are wired differently. Okay. There is often an emotional depth and intensity and complexity. Again, emotionally, psychologically, cognitively, all of these things, it's like if I were to put it in real simple terms, it just feels like more. It's just more. It's just more of everything. and for gifted women, if you don't know you're gifted and you just grow up feeling this way, you likely grew up feeling different than other people, or embarrassed at times, or maybe even ashamed of certain aspects of who you are, maybe even in your family, feeling like you didn't quite fit in, certainly in your peer group. And whether you were labeled, quote unquote, labeled as a gifted child or not, many gifted women, for lots of different reasons, which I won't get into at this moment, do not get identified as gifted. And part of what I really feel passionate about is helping women understand and identify if this is part of who they are, like how to make sense of that, how to work with it, and not pathologize these aspects of themselves, because they're not problems to be solved. They're really just beautiful parts of how you were created from the very beginning. All of this and flourishing. So when we're talking about flourishing for a gifted woman, it's hard for the traditional models to fit someone who doesn't fit into a traditional box. Like there might be aspects that can be helpful, sure, but some things just are not quite as simple to take from, here's this model that works for fill in the blank, most people. And now we're going to translate that and expect it to work for the gifted woman, right? And then we try it and it doesn't seem to work for us, or what's wrong with us? And there's this frustration and then guilt or shame or whatever. Negative cycle there. Again, I want you to frame it when we're thinking about giftedness, being a gifted woman. This is the frame. You are not too much. You're just not meant to flourish in systems that weren't designed for you. So if you're a gifted, intuitive woman, someone who thinks deeply and processes emotionally, feels everything intensely, then you've probably outgrown the typical advice. Maybe you've been told you're too much or not enough. Maybe success came at the cost of your peace. Or maybe you've spent years helping others thrive, helping everyone else around you thrive, while secretly feeling like you're holding yourself together by a thread. Does that sound familiar to any of you? Just know you're not broken. You're just sensitive in a world that rewards numbness. I'm going to say that again. You're just sensitive in a world that rewards numbness. You're brilliant in a system that asks you to shrink. And you're ready not for more hacks, but for something real, something whole. So flourishing for us means nervous system healing. It means emotional sovereignty. It means spiritual alignment. And my opinion, my lens, the thing that I bring to this conversation in particular is beauty. Not just aesthetic, but soul deep beauty that nourishes us from the inside out. Because as a gifted woman, whether you realize it or not, you are so exquisitely attuned to everything around you that incorporating beauty into your life in all its ways is going to help you flourish, I think, in a way that we sometimes just honestly forget. So let me share with you just briefly, and I will share more in future episodes, but very briefly, my own story. I've had a very long life of hard, challenging things. I'm not going to get into all of that right now, but even though I've had a life of a lot of challenging things, I was very resilient. I've had mentors tell me, one of the things that is so striking about me and my story is my resiliency, which honestly sometimes feels like, gosh, I wish I didn't have to be so resilient. Do, do any of you know what I'm talking about? Where you're like, I wish I didn't have to go through so many hard things in my life to become so resilient, but I did. And I have. And I was successful. If you looked at the checklist of my dreams and goals that I had written out for myself when I was a teenager, when I was in my early 20s, my mid 20s, I had completed them like check, 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 check before I ever hit 40. Like big dreams, things that I truly wasn't sure I'd ever be able to accomplish. Even though I believed it was I obviously believed on some level it was possible, but they still felt like these huge dreams. So for example, just very briefly, I grew up in a family that we had a lot of challenges. Aside from the family dynamics and the things that my parents were struggling with, part of it was financial. And neither of my parents had graduated from college. And so I grew up in a state of, there was a lot of financial worry, a lot of financial stress, and I just didn't have anyone near me. We didn't live a life of abundance. I wouldn't have even known what that word meant. But I had this feeling early on that I was meant to excel. I knew I could excel. I always excelled in school. And so that was the path for me. I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do it. I don't even know anyone who's gotten a PhD, but like I had heard about it. And I knew that if you were a psychologist, because I did all the study when I was in high school, interviewed people, right? I interviewed psychiatrists, I interviewed psychologists. I knew I kind of wanted to go into the mental health space. I decided this is what I want to do. And at the age of 15, I started telling people this is what I want to do. I was one of those weird people that knew early on. But then, as life has it, I made some, I will say, poor choices. They were poor choices, but I understand with so much compassion where they were coming from at that tender age that I was when I was unraveling in my teenage years because of all the trauma and things happening in my family. I made a choice and I got pregnant at 19, freshly 19, and decided to have my baby girl. And at the age of 19, gave birth to my daughter, Audrey, who nowadays is 28 and has a daughter of her own. I am a brand new grandmother. That's a side note. But I'm there at 19. And I told you at 15, I had already started thinking about becoming a psychologist. By 17, I had started college. By 18, I was like, this is, I thought at 19, I was midway through college, and I thought, how am I going to do this? I don't even know how I was going to do it without a baby. And I was, just to be clear, I was deciding to raise her alone as a single parent. I was not married. I had no intention of marrying my child's father. And there was, maybe you call it just like this huge leap of faith. I didn't know how I was going to do it financially. I just didn't know how I was going to do it, but I knew I was meant to do it. Like I just had that knowing I was meant to do it. This is my path. I'm supposed to do this thing. And so I did. It took, it was a path and it was not easy. But I eventually did that. That's one example, like a key example of what I mean when I had a dream. It seemed impossible. Then I got pregnant. Then it seemed really impossible. But eventually I did it. And there were a lot of other dreams like that, even just more beautiful dreams that I completed before I turned 40. And so then what do you do when you've really done all the things that your heart ever desired? It's a weird, beautiful, wonderful problem to have. However, I had done all these things and it looked amazing. And honestly, even for me, I was like, this is amazing. Eventually I got married later in my 30s, but I got married. My daughter, I raised her. She went off to college. Like, I was like, what else? And it really was good. There was a lot that was so good. My life looked on paper beautiful. I was helping others thrive. I was leading programs. I was the strong one. I was always the strong one, and I was so used to that. I didn't know any different, but inside I just hit a point where I was tired, and not just physically, but spiritually and emotionally, and just, it was like a tired that felt, and this probably sounds very dramatic, but a tired that felt like tired from my whole life. Like, meaning I had been going at this rate my entire life, going, going, going. I never took a summer off. Like, even when I was in high school, I was in summer school, like, for fun. I chose to do it, not because I needed to. I would do it so I could advance. Do you know what I'm saying? Can anyone relate? I had just been going at this pace, achieving, achieving, achieving as a single mom for so long that I didn't even know what it meant to rest, to really rest. I didn't really know it at the time because, again, I didn't know. You don't know what you don't know. You can't know what you haven't really experienced yet. But I was performing more than I was living. And it wasn't until I let go of trying to be perfect, and honestly, it took a health crisis that finally catapulted me into my real, like, healing journey of the last, I would say, 5 years. And I started reclaiming the quiet wisdom within me through embodiment, through prayer, through nervous system work, through a lot of stillness, that I began to truly flourish. And the irony is, let me tell you, before all of this happened, I was teaching people how to flourish. I was still teaching this. And it wasn't that I wasn't flourishing at all, or that I didn't have some level of that in my life, but it just hit a point where I clearly wasn't, you know? And now I'm on this other side of things, and it feels so different in my body. I feel different in my body. I am sure people experience me differently today than they would have 10 years ago. I'm curious what my husband would say, but I think he would agree. That was longer than I meant to share, but that journey of mine is a big part of why I'm doing this podcast, because all of you have your own journey. And if you are listening to this and something resonates, and I know we've just begun, but if something is resonating, I want you to stick with me, because you may already identify and say, oh my gosh, yes, I think I'm a gifted woman. And you may be listening to this and say, well, I feel pretty tired, but I don't know if I'm a gifted woman. That's fine. And there's also a spectrum. So, it's not like black or white, but I want you to hang in and listen to some more episodes, because we are going to really dive in more deeply to the emotional and psychological experience of gifted women, and really unpack that some more so that you have a deeper understanding of what possibly might be going on in your own life and in your own experience. And we're going to just play around with some ideas that I think our culture is, I get the sense that we're ready for it. I get the sense that even women, entrepreneurs, leaders, female leaders, we're just at a breaking point that some of us we're at least curious to know, is it possible for me to live life in such a way that doesn't feel consistently exhausting? Like, is it possible? How do I do that? How do I even begin to know where to start? Maybe we even know what we need to do, like, oh, I need to set boundaries, or, oh, I need to do this, or, whatever it is, but we don't actually know how to do that well, or it's still just such a struggle. And so then we don't do it, right? There's a lot there's resistance behind making these changes. Trust me, I know, because it was hard for me. It's hard to rest when your nervous system isn't familiar with rest. So this sanctuary, this podcast as your sanctuary, can be a place where even if you're like, I'm curious to know how to rest, I'd like to play around with that idea, even if I'm not fully bought in yet, or I'm scared what will happen if I rest, I'm scared what will happen if I let go of this part of me that is like the achieving, performing part of me. Like, what will happen, Just listen. Just be part of the conversation. I would love to hear from you too. This is the beginning of a long conversation. So please email me if you have any questions that you want me to talk about, topics, thoughts, reactions to this. My hope is that each episode feels like a breath of fresh air for you. Just a soft landing in your week, a place where you can remember you were never meant to stay small. You may feel like too much. You may be too much, but you're not really too much. You are exactly as you are created and meant to be. So if you are finishing this episode wondering, am I a gifted woman? Like, maybe I am. I'm not sure. How might that be shaping my experience of life? Then I encourage you to take the free quiz. I'll put the link in the show notes. You can find out. It's not a diagnostic, but you can take the quiz and it will give you some idea of how many of the characteristics and traits of things that you might be experiencing overlap with the common experience of a gifted woman. And if you're already feeling like you want to go deeper and you're just like, I need someone to help me. I think I'm a gifted woman, or I'm not sure if I'm a gifted woman, but I think this woman might be able to help me. I encourage you to book a flourishing call with me. It is free. It could be 15, 20 minutes, no pressure. It's just a space to explore what flourishing might look like for you and what working with me could look like. So you can find that link also in the show notes. And remember, flourishing is not a luxury. It is your birthright. I'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to the Power to Flourish podcast. I hope today's conversation left you feeling more seen, more supported, and more deeply connected to yourself. And if this episode resonated, would you take a moment to subscribe, leave a review, or share it with a friend? It's one of the best ways to help this work reach the women who need it most. You'll find show notes, links, and resources from today's episode at powertoflourish.com. And now just a quick reminder, this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It's not therapy, medical advice, or a substitute for professional support. And listening doesn't make me your therapist or doctor, though if you're looking for a coach, you know where to find me. All right, beautiful one, that's it for now. Until next time, trust yourself, honor your gifts, and keep flourishing.